Look closely at your screens. This isn't a scene from a fictional espionage thriller. This is raw, unfiltered reality playing out on the private, fog-choked roads of the Sandringham Estate. The mainstream media is currently feeding you a polite, heavily sanitized lie. They are telling you that Prince Andrew is quietly fading into a peaceful, dignified retirement. But we have the inside timeline of what truly happened this weekend. A silent, brutal constitutional coup has just been executed within the absolute highest echelons of the House of Windsor. On Friday evening, as Andrew's private convoy attempted to enter the secluded royal compound, it was suddenly and violently halted. Not by road paparazzi, but by armed royal protection officers. Prince Andrew was physically barred from stepping out of his vehicle. A £30 million private estate has been instantaneously frozen. His residency at the Royal Lodge has been abruptly terminated. And the architect of this absolute, unmitigated destruction? The hardest-working, most ruthless defender of the crown, Princess Anne. Before we expose the heavily guarded constitutional loopholes used to execute this takedown, I need you to impress that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. The palace machine works overtime to keep these inner workings hidden from the public, and your support allows us to keep tearing down the royal veil. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and prepare yourself for the truth. To fully comprehend the sheer ruthlessness of what Princess Anne just did, we must rewind the clock exactly 3 weeks. The palace was not in a state of mourning. It was in a state of quiet, suffocating panic. Unsealed court documents in New York were threatening to detonate a brand new wave of civil lawsuits against the Duke of York. The ghosts of his past associations were refusing to stay buried, and the fallout threatened to shatter the fragile public trust King Charles had spent the beginning of his reign meticulously building. Andrew knew the walls were rapidly closing in. The polite suggestions for him to step out of the limelight were no longer enough to protect the monarchy's global standing. So, cornered and desperate, the Duke devised a secret survival plan. Palace insiders, speaking under the strictest conditions of anonymity, revealed that Andrew was attempting a backdoor return to public life by aggressively leveraging his own flesh and blood. His daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. His logic was as twisted as it was clear. If he could force King Charles to elevate his daughters to official working royal status, he believed he could hide behind their newly minted diplomatic immunity. He would systematically use the York sisters as a human shield, tying his own financial and social survival to their elevated royal duties, ensuring he maintained his iron grip on his portion of the sovereign grant. It was a parasitic strategy, designed to force the monarch's hand by preying on Charles's known affection for his nieces. But Prince Andrew's desperate calculation missed one devastatingly crucial detail. King Charles was undergoing medical treatment, temporarily stepping back from the grueling daily administration of the realm. And in his absence, the absolute power of the crown was not left in a vacuum. It was temporarily and legally vested in the councillors of state. Enter what insiders are now calling the Sandringham Accord. My deeply embedded sources inside the Privy Council have leaked the terrifying details of this legal nuclear bomb. Make no mistake, this was not a petty family squabble over property. This was a constitutional execution, planned with military precision and executed without a single drop of mercy. When Princess Anne assumed her duties as a councillor of state, she bypassed the modern, softer legal frameworks that Charles typically favoured. She ordered the most elite royal lawyers to dig deep into the dusty, restricted archives of the Crown's history. They did not rely on contemporary real estate law to evict him. Instead, they exhumed a terrifying piece of archaic legislation, the Sovereign Immunity Clause, deeply embedded within the original text of the 1840 Regency Act. This hyper-specific, antiquated law allows a designated councillor of state to enact a mandate of total financial sequestration against any blood relative who is deemed an active, existential threat to the monarch's public standing and the stability of the realm. The language of the document is chilling in its absolute finality. It does not ask for compliance. It legally and entirely severs Andrew from the vast resources of the Crown estate. It strips him of his financial autonomy with the stroke of a pen. What was delivered to him was not a polite eviction suggestion regarding the Royal Lodge. It is a state-sanctioned financial freeze, a modern-day excommunication wrapped in heavy, gold-embossed parchment. The mobilization of the 1840 Regency Act is something that has not been witnessed in modern royal history. It requires an iron will to weaponize the Constitution against your own brother, a willingness to prioritize the survival of the 1,000-year-old institution over the bonds of shared childhood. But Princess Anne has never been one to let sentimentality cloud her duty. For years, the public has viewed her as the pragmatic, fiercely loyal daughter of Queen Elizabeth, the stoic figure riding in full military uniform behind the royal carriages. Behind the closed doors of the palaces, however, she is known simply as the enforcer. When King Charles hesitated, burdened by fraternal guilt and a desire for familial peace during his medical treatments, Anne saw only a festering wound that threatened to infect the entire monarchy. She understood that Andrew's backdoor machinations with Beatrice and Eugenie were not just a plea for relevance, but a direct challenge to the streamlined, modernized monarchy Charles had promised the public. The Sandringham Accord was drawn up in absolute secrecy. Not even Andrew's closest aides had any inkling that a legal daughter, the guillotine, was being sharpened just down the corridor. As Friday evening approached, the trap was meticulously set. Before the dramatic interception of his blacked-out Jaguars on the gravel roads, a much quieter, yet infinitely more familiar, a brutal confrontation took place. The stage was set in the dark, mahogany-lined expanse of the Sandringham Library, a room heavy with the weight of royal history, dust motes floating in a single, dying shaft of evening light. It was Friday evening, exactly 6:45 p.m. The silence in the library was reportedly suffocating, broken only by the sporadic, dry crackle of the fireplace. King Charles was conspicuously absent. This was not a negotiation brokered by a sympathetic monarch. This was a tribunal of one. Only Princess Anne and Prince Andrew occupied the shadowy space. According to a highly placed senior courtier who stood guard just inches outside the heavy oak doors, the confrontation was not a screaming match. It was terrifyingly, aggressively quiet. Andrew, stripped of his usual bluster, was pacing the Persian rugs like a trapped animal. His breathing was shallow and heavy, echoing in the vast room. The courtier noted that the Duke's hands were visibly shaking as the terrifying reality of his situation began to dawn on him. He wasn't just being sidelined, he was being systematically erased. Desperation setting in, Andrew reportedly began to beg. He weaponized his past, his voice cracking as he yelled that he was a prince of the blood royal, the favorite son of the late Queen, a decorated veteran who had flown helicopters in the Falklands War. He demanded the respect owed to his birthright, pleading for a sliver of the leniency that had always shielded him from the consequences of his actions. But Princess Anne did not even flinch. She remained seated behind the massive antique desk, her posture military perfect, an immovable force of constitutional will. Insiders say she did not look at him with the pity of a sister, but with the exact same ice-cold, unforgiving eyes of their late father, Prince Philip. She let his desperate pleas hang in the dead air before delivering the killing blow. "You are a liability," Anne reportedly whispered, her voice dangerously low, entirely devoid of any familial warmth or sisterly affection. "And the firm will not sink with you." With those words, she slowly pushed the heavy, gold-embossed Sandringham Accord across the polished mahogany surface. It was not a contract to be signed, it was a death warrant to be witnessed. Throughout this broadcast, I have asked you to carefully consider how the Palace A machine operates when its very existence is threatened by one of its own. We have seen this exact, ruthless apparatus activate before. Cast your minds back to 1996, a time when Princess Diana's explosive public divorce and unprecedented media warfare threatened to permanently topple the ancient foundations of the monarchy. When the institution was pushed to the absolute brink, the firm closed ranks with lethal efficiency. They stripped the mother of the future king of her Royal Highness title with cold, legal precision. They banished her from the inner sanctum, brutally demonstrating that the preservation of the crown will always, unequivocally, supersede human emotion, familial bonds, and public popularity. Princess Anne has just activated that exact same, terrifying survival mechanism. For weeks, royal commentators and the public alike have wondered why King Charles hasn't simply kicked Andrew out of the crumbling royal lodge himself. Why the endless delays? Why the polite standoffs over security details and mouldy roofs? Here is the delayed revelation, the closely guarded secret the palace spin doctors prayed it would never leak. King Charles couldn't do it. The king is too emotionally compromised, too deeply intertwined with the shared history of his childhood, and ultimately, too weak when it comes to delivering the final blow to his disgraced brother. The monarch was paralyzed by a misguided sense of fraternal loyalty. Recognizing this fatal hesitation, Princess Anne stepped into the void. She weaponized her temporary, absolute power under the 1840 Regency Act to completely bypass the king. She didn't ask for his permission. She operated under the legal mandate that demanded the protection of the sovereign's dignity above all else. Anne took the constitutional sin upon herself. She became the executioner so her brother, the king, could keep his hands clean. This is the true burden of the crown, the quiet, unspeakable acts committed in the shadows to keep the golden carriage rolling in the daylight. The genius of Princess Anne's maneuver lay in its absolute, unappealable finality. By invoking the 1840 Regency Act, she effectively blocked any avenue of course. Andrew could not appeal to Parliament because this was a matter of internal sovereign authority. He could not appeal to the king because the king was temporarily incapacitated in his executive functions, legally superseded by the very councillors of state orchestrating the coup. It was a perfectly designed constitutional checkmate. As he stood there in the dimly lit library, the true horror of his isolation washed over him. The armed royal protection officers waiting out on the gravel road were no longer there to protect him from the world. They were there to protect the crown from him. The swiftness of the execution left no time for countermaneuvers. No desperate phone calls to Beatrice and Eugenie could save him now. The human shields he had intended to use were completely oblivious to the massacre unfolding behind the heavy oak doors of Sandringham. The firm was excising the cancer, cutting off the blood supply with surgical, ruthless precision. As the clock ticked mercilessly toward 7 p.m., the atmosphere in the Sandringham Estate shifted from anticipation to brutal, unyielding finality. The paperwork sitting on the desk between them was not a mere draft. It had already been meticulously scrutinized, validated, and endorsed by the most powerful, invisible figures within the British establishment. The Privy Council, operating entirely behind closed doors in a rapid response emergency session, had laid the groundwork for this precise moment. They were merely waiting for the signal from the Princess Royal. Andrew stared at the document, the archaic legal phrasing of the Sovereign Immunity Clause dancing before his eyes. Total financial sequestration. The words translated to complete and utter ruin. Without the sovereign grant, without his hidden royal patronages, without the millions funneled into his private security, he was entirely defenseless. He was a man accustomed to absolute privilege, suddenly realizing that the very institution that had shielded him from the consequences of his actions for decades was now the very force actively dismantling his life. At precisely 7 o'clock in the evening, the legal finality was executed, with the deafening silence of an empire crushing a single man. Deep within a highly secured, subterranean archives room beneath the streets of London, an official, a royal archivist, opened a massive, centuries-old, leather-bound ledger. A heavy, ink-stained brass stamp came down on a piece of pristine vellum parchment, the dull thud echoing with the absolute finality of a judge's gavel. Back in the suffocating quiet of the Sandringham Library, Princess Anne did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. She picked up a heavy fountain pen and signed the mandate, her signature angular, sharp, and entirely uncompromising. The very moment the ink dried on the parchment, the trap snapped completely and irreversibly shut. The Privy Council, waiting in the shadows for this exact constitutional confirmation, instantly and ruthlessly dissolved Andrew's remaining, carefully hidden royal patronages. The intricate network of prestigious charities and ceremonial military titles he had secretly clung to as a desperate lifeline to relevance was incinerated in an instant. Furthermore, his £3 million a year taxpayer-funded private security detail was legally and permanently revoked. He was instantly stripped of his armed guards, left entirely exposed and physically vulnerable, downgraded to the status of an ordinary, unprotected citizen. But the deepest, most permanent cut of all was recorded in the official royal registry. The Crown Gazette, the ultimate, unquestionable public record of the British state, formally and legally downgraded the York family's status. This was not a carefully worded press release spun by public relations experts. It was a permanent, historical demotion printed in stark black and white for all of eternity. And the eviction notice for the sprawling 30-room mansion known as Royal Lodge? It was instantaneously transformed by Anne's signature. It was no longer a polite, frustrating request from an ailing king, nor was it a drawn-out point of negotiation regarding expensive roof repairs. It became a finalized, unappealable legal decree of immediate expulsion. The £30 million private estate was locked down, as the crushing reality of his total disenfranchisement settled upon his shoulders. In the dimly lit library, Andrew realized that the convoy of blacked-out Jaguars, sitting idling on the cold dirt road outside, would not be taking him to a comfortable, dignified retirement. They were there to escort a ghost off the premises. He was formally, legally, banished from the inner sanctum. Prince Andrew is now completely trapped. The financial freeze enacted by his sister is absolute, impenetrable, and globally enforced. Under the strict, archaic parameters of the Sandringham Accord, he cannot move, he cannot travel internationally, and he cannot execute a single significant financial transaction without the explicit, written permission of the firm. His private bank accounts, tied intrinsically to the sovereign grant and ancient royal trusts, are frozen solid. He is confined to a deeply humiliating existence, entirely dependent on the meager, heavily monitored allowances the Crown chooses to drip-feed him, solely to keep him from becoming a total, embarrassing derelict in the eyes of the global press. It is a masterful, undeniably brutal containment strategy. He has been placed in an invisible cage, completely stripped of his titles, his vast wealth, and his remaining dignity, left to watch the monarchy move forward into the future without him. This is the ruthless, unvarnished reality of the Windsor machine. When the survival of the crown is actively threatened, blood means absolutely nothing. Absolute loyalty to the institution means everything. But do not think for one single second that this war is entirely over. The king may be protected for now, safely shielded behind the iron will and constitutional ruthlessness of his sister. But Princess Anne's devastating maneuver has created a massive, incredibly dangerous, unresolved tension within the very heart of the royal family. Look closely at the collateral damage left in the wake of this execution. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, two women who have desperately tried to walk the impossible tightrope between supporting their disgraced father and dutifully serving the monarch, have just watched their patriarch be publicly and legally annihilated by the very institution they serve. They have been brutally stripped of the human shield Andrew intended them to be, only to find themselves treated as collateral damage in a constitutional slaughter. They are the blood of York, deeply sidelined, profoundly humiliated, and forced to watch their family's legacy turn to ash at the hands of their own aunt. The ultimate, terrifying question now looms over the palace gates, like a dark storm clouds. Will the York sisters silently accept this total humiliation? Will they dutifully bow their heads, force smiles for the cameras at Royal Ascot, and pretend their father wasn't just erased from the annals of royal history? Or are Beatrice and Eugenie, armed with dangerous insider knowledge, deep-seated resentment, and powerful aristocratic connections of their own, secretly preparing to mount a silent, devastating rebellion from the inside. As Prince William prepares to one day take the throne and lead a modernized monarchy, he now inherits a deeply fractured family and two spurned cousins who have every psychological reason to orchestrate his downfall. The Sandringham freeze has been successfully executed. The enemy has been neutralized. But the ice is already starting to crack under the immense, unseen pressure. The monarchy has survived 1,000 years, not through softness, but through calculated, unyielding brutality. Princess Anne has unequivocally proven that she is the true enforcer, the uncompromising backbone of the House of Windsor, willing to do the terrifying, necessary things King Charles simply cannot stomach. If you stand with Princess Anne's no-nonsense leadership, and if you believe she did exactly what was required to protect the crown from utter ruin, I need you to type the word Anne in the comments below right now. Make your voice heard in the algorithm. And if you haven't already, you need to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on all notifications. The palace walls are crumbling. The internal wars are escalating to unprecedented heights, and we will be here to expose every single dark secret they desperately try to hide. The ice is about to break. Do not miss our next update.